Welcome to Stories Junction. Let's begin today's story. The first time Liam Harper saw her, she stood barefoot in a small art gallery in Seattle, her head tilted, lost in a watercolor painting no one else seemed to notice. Her name was Nora, a freelance graphic designer with a quiet confidence that didn't stem from wealth or status, but from the way she held her secrets, tucked away, unspoken, and woven into her drive. Liam, a data engineer in his mid-30s, wasn't used to being pulled towards someone so instantly. His life was precise, calculated. Black coffee at 5:30 a.m., gym by 6:30, code reviews by 8 o'clock, project deadlines, and evenings alone with a book or a podcast. But Nora broke that rhythm the moment she smiled at his clumsy attempt at conversation near a sculpture shaped like a shattered compass. They crossed paths again a week later, then again, and somewhere between those chance encounters and late-night talks about design and data over glasses of Merlot, their connection sparked, fast, almost too fast. Within 9 months, Nora had moved into Liam's sleek condo perched on the edge of Seattle's quieter hills. Their lives blended seamlessly. She filled their space with eclectic art prints and sage-green cushions. He streamlined her chaotic invoicing system and built her a custom portfolio website. They loved fiercely her scent, jasmine and cedar, clinging to his sweaters, her laughter warming their kitchen as they cooked together. For 2 years, they were unshakable. Liam didn't question her late nights with clients or the way she left her phone face down during coffee runs. Trust was a cornerstone he wouldn't touch. But that shifted the night Nora invited him to a colleague's promotion party at a waterfront villa outside the city. Lanterns glowed along the deck, fairy lights twinkled above the lawn, and soft jazz hummed through the air. Liam, nursing a whiskey by the fire pit, looked up as headlights cut through the dusk. Nora stepped out, stunning in a deep emerald dress, but she wasn't alone. Beside her was a man, tall, charismatic, with a tailored blazer and an effortless swagger. Nora smiled at Liam and said, "This is Julian, a new client. Big branding project in Capitol Hill. We've been working closely." Liam offered a handshake, steady but firm. Julian's grip was too bold, his gaze on Nora not just appreciative but proprietary, like she was a prize he'd already claimed. The party continued, but something cracked. Julian lingered too near Nora, brushing her shoulder when he spoke, leaning in too close during laughs. Liam, usually collected, felt his pulse tighten. He tried to dismiss it as paranoia, but when Nora whispered something to Julian during a toast, Liam's glass nearly cracked in his hand. Later, alone by the dessert table, Julian smirked at him. "You're Liam, right? The tech guy. Nora mentions you sometimes." Liam nodded, silent, and walked away, but a splinter of doubt had lodged itself in his chest. The next morning, Liam brewed coffee as usual, but Nora was already gone. A text blinked on his phone. "Client crisis. Meetings all day. Don't wait up." He stared at the words, the steam from his mug curling like suspicion. Over the next weeks, Julian's name wove into Nora's stories too often. Late-night revisions, client dinners. "He's just intense," she said once, laughing it off. "You know, creative types." Liam asked no questions, but he noticed everything. The night she came home with damp hair, claiming a sudden downpour when the streets were bone dry. The afternoon she said she was in Capitol Hill, but a coworker saw her near Fremont with Julian. The breaking point came when Nora mentioned a team retreat, tossing out casually while sorting mail. "It's a 3-day thing at Cedar Ridge Lodge. Just designers, a few clients, people like Julian. Networking, you know." Liam stayed calm, but after a pause, he said, "If you go on that trip, don't come back here afterward." Nora froze. "What?" Liam's voice didn't waver. "You heard me. You go, and this door stays locked." She laughed, incredulous. "It's work, Liam. You know how much my career means." He didn't argue, didn't plead, just let the silence speak. She left the next morning, her duffel bag slung over her shoulder, her sketchbook tucked under her arm, her goodbye kiss grazing his jaw. Liam watched from the window as she slid into an Uber, glanced back once, and disappeared. Then he made a call, not to a friend, not to a therapist, but to Carter Vaughn, a private investigator whose name he'd saved after a colleague's recommendation. Carter was no amateur, former intelligence, sharp as a blade, and colder than a winter tide. Liam sent him the address of Cedar Ridge Lodge, 2 photos of Nora, and a timeline. "I need proof," Liam said. "No drama, no confrontation, just the truth." Carter's reply was clipped. "You'll have it in 48 hours. Liam went through his days like nothing had changed. Coding, running, meetings, but beneath it, a storm brewed. He didn't know what Carter would find, but the part of him that once saw forever with Nora was already bracing for impact. What came next would unravel everything, and Nora, still sketching designs at the lodge, had no idea how deep the consequences would run. 2 days after Nora left for the retreat, Liam's phone pinged at 11:17 p.m. The email from Carter Vaughn sat in his inbox. Its subject line stark: Cedar Ridge report complete. His finger hovered over the screen, heart thudding not with anger, but with the weight of what he might find. He clicked. Inside was a folder with 4 images and a single line. Images captured 6:45 p.m., day 1, Lakeview Trail near Cedar Ridge Dock. The first photo showed Nora and Julian walking along a wooded path, far from the lodge's glow, their hands brushing too closely to be accidental. Her head tilted toward him, her smile unguarded, the same one she used to give Liam in their quiet moments. The second image was worse. They sat on a blanket by the lake, Nora's sandals kicked off, a bottle of Pinot Noir between them, Julian's hand resting on her lower back. The third and fourth photos stole the air from Liam's lungs. A kiss, not rushed or reckless, but deliberate, her fingers curled into Julian's jacket, his hand cupping her face. The images weren't blurry or staged. They were clear, undeniable, a story told in pixels. Liam sat back, staring at the screen, the silence of his condo deafening. No rage surged, no tears came, just a deep, hollow ache, like a foundation cracking beneath a house. The woman he'd loved, the one he'd built a life with, had crossed a line, and she'd done it with ease. He didn't sleep that night. Instead, he planned, not with fury, but with a precision that mirrored his coding, methodical, clean, final. This wasn't about hurting Nora. It was about reclaiming his life, piece by piece. By morning, he'd started. He reprogrammed the smart locks on the condo, rendering Nora's keys useless. The keypad code was reset, her biometric access erased from the security system. He logged into their shared accounts, bank, utilities, streaming services, and removed her access, transferring half their joint savings into a protected trust she couldn't touch. Then he began packing her things. Every item was handled with care, not out of sentiment, but because he wanted no trace of her left. Her sketchbooks, her mismatched mugs, the scarf she draped over the couch, the earrings she'd left on the bathroom counter, each one in boxes, sealed with tape, labeled with her name. The last item was a note, written in his steady hand. "You pack for the retreat. I'll pack the rest. This door isn't yours anymore." No signature, no flourish, just truth. He shipped the boxes to Nora's parents' house in Oregon, priority mail, tracked and insured. By the time the courier left, the condo felt lighter, as if it had exhaled a breath it had been holding for months. Liam went for a run, answered emails, and joined a virtual meeting, his face betraying nothing. But inside, the storm still churned, not because of what Nora had done, but because of what he now knew he was capable of, letting go fully without looking back. Nora, meanwhile, was still at Cedar Ridge, sketching branding mock-ups by day and laughing with Julian by night, oblivious to the unraveling in Seattle. She texted Liam once, a casual "miss you, crazy day, talk soon?" He didn't reply. On the third day, she returned to the condo, her duffel slung over her shoulder, scrolling through her phone with a faint smile, likely a message from Julian about some shared joke. She reached the front door, tried her key, and frowned when it didn't turn. The keypad beeped red, rejecting her code. She rang the bell, knocked, then knocked harder, her pulse quickening. A neighbor passing by glanced at her, curious. "Locked out?" they asked. Nora forced a laugh. "Yeah, must have forgotten the new code." She texted Liam, "Hey, I'm back." Can you open the door? No response. Liam, seriously, what's going on? Still nothing. Her stomach twisted as she checked the mailbox, finding a delivery slip with her name, addressed to her parents' house in Oregon. Her phone buzzed, a voicemail from earlier, one she'd missed. It was her mother, voice soft but strained. Nora, honey, you need to call me. Now. Nora's legs felt unsteady as she dialed. Her mother answered on the first ring. Nora, there are boxes here. Your things. From Liam. And photos. Nora, photos of you and some man. Julian. A pause, heavy with disbelief. I went to Liam's place, told him he was being harsh, but then I saw. I didn't know. Tell me the truth, Nora. Was it real? Nora's breath caught, her voice barely a whisper. I didn't mean to hurt anyone. Her mother's tone hardened, just slightly. You did. And not just Liam. The call ended with a click, leaving Nora standing on the curb, the condo looming behind her, dark and silent. She sank to the steps, her suitcase beside her, the weight of her choices crashing down like a wave she couldn't outrun. She thought about banging on the door, begging, explaining, but the stillness of the house told her it was futile. Liam wasn't just gone. He was done. And as she sat there, the realization hit. This was only the beginning of what she'd set in motion. What came next would echo far beyond a locked door. Nora didn't leave the condo steps right away. She sat, frozen, her suitcase a silent companion on the cold stone, her phone clutched like a lifeline that had already snapped. The Uber that dropped her off lingered across the street, its driver glancing her way before pulling off into the Seattle dusk. She considered knocking again, shouting through the door, pleading for Liam to listen, but the house's silence was louder than any words she could muster. It wasn't angry, it was final. She stood, legs unsteady, and gave the driver her parents' address in Oregon, a place she hadn't called home in years. The ride felt endless, the city blurring past like a life she no longer recognized. When she arrived, her parents' porch light glowed softly, and inside, her boxes were stacked neatly in the entryway. Her favorite boots sat on top, next to a sketchbook she'd filled with ideas for their condo. Her mother greeted her, eyes heavy with disappointment rather than anger. On the hall table sat an envelope, unopened, its edges slightly creased. Her mother didn't mention it, just placed a hand on Nora's shoulder and said, "Get some rest." Nora climbed the stairs to her old bedroom, the one with faded posters and a twin bed that creaked under her weight. She didn't open the envelope. She didn't cry. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment with Liam, his quiet gestures, the way he'd leave her coffee just how she liked it, the trust she'd taken for granted. She'd traded it all for Julian's fleeting charm, for the rush of feeling seen in a way that felt new but was ultimately hollow. Morning came, gray and damp. Nora sat at the kitchen table, her mother's silence louder than any lecture. The envelope still sat untouched, but its presence burned. She knew what was inside. Photos, proof, the truth she couldn't deny. She'd hurt Liam, yes, but she'd also shattered the version of herself she'd worked so hard to build. Julian had been a spark, a distraction, but now he was a shadow, and she was left to face the wreckage alone. She tried texting him, a desperate "we need to talk," but his reply was a single word, busy. It stung more than she expected, not because she wanted him, but because it confirmed what she'd begun to suspect. Julian wasn't a partner. He was a catalyst, there for the thrill and gone when the stakes got real. Back in Seattle, Liam was dismantling the life they'd shared with surgical precision. He deleted their shared cloud folders, erased her from his phone's emergency contacts, and changed every password, from Netflix to the smart thermostat. It wasn't petty. It was purposeful, a reclaiming of his space, his peace. He packed away the small things that still carried her echo, the teal throw blanket she loved, the half-used candle that smelled like her perfume, the recipe card for her favorite pasta dish. He didn't throw them out. He donated them, letting strangers claim the remnants of a life he no longer wanted. He called his lawyer, ensuring Nora's name was scrubbed from every legal tie. The car lease, the shared credit card, even the small business account for a side project she'd helped name. It's not about money, he told his lawyer. voice steady. It's about starting clean. His lawyer nodded. Clean's good. Final's better. Liam didn't stop there. He posted on social media. Not a rant, not a sob story, but a single image. Himself on a rooftop deck, coffee mug in hand, the Seattle skyline behind him, dawn breaking soft and gold. The caption read, "Freedom's not loud. It's the quiet you find when you let go of what's already left." Friends liked it, commented with support, asked questions he didn't answer. The post rippled through their circle, and soon, whispers reached Nora. A friend texted her, saw Liam's post. "You okay?" Another sent, "Heard something happened. Want to talk?" Nora didn't reply. She couldn't. The truth was seeping out, and she had no way to contain it. Julian, meanwhile, had vanished from her life as quickly as he'd entered it. A week after the retreat, she called him, voice shaking. "Julian, we need to figure this out." His tone was cool, distant. "Nora, it was fun. You knew that. Don't make it more than it was." She snapped. "I lost everything for this." He sighed. "That was your call, not mine." The line went dead, and with it, any illusion she'd clung to. Julian wasn't her future. He was a mirror showing her what she'd sacrificed for a moment of validation. Nora tried to rebuild. She sent out job applications, dozens, then more, but Seattle's design scene was tight-knit, and her name carried a faint stain. Colleagues who once praised her work now responded with vague excuses or silence. She landed a few small gigs, but her creativity felt stifled, her confidence cracked. She'd always been bold, the designer who could walk into a room and own it, but now she second-guessed every pitch, every sketch. The spark that had defined her was dim, and she couldn't find a switch to turn it back on. Liam, on the other hand, was thriving in ways he hadn't expected. He took up kayaking on Lake Washington, joined a local tech meetup, and started mentoring young coders at a community center. He didn't talk about Nora, didn't linger on the past. When a coworker asked if he'd ever been in love, he smiled faintly and said, "I learned what I needed to." His life wasn't perfect, but it was his, free of shadows, built on choices he could stand behind. Yet Nora, back in Oregon, was about to discover that the consequences of her actions weren't done unfolding. Something was coming, something that would make her realize the depth of what she'd lost. And it wasn't just Liam's love. Winter settled over Seattle like a heavy fog, and Nora's life mirrored its chill. She'd left her parents' house in Oregon after a month, renting a cramped studio apartment in a building that smelled of stale coffee and mildew. The walls were thin, the heater rattled, and the windows never quite kept out the damp. She'd lost weight, not from intention, but from the grind of stress. Her cheekbones sharp, her hair pulled back in a careless bun. The Nora who once commanded client meetings with a bold smile was gone, replaced by someone who moved through days like a ghost. Her phone stayed quiet, no longer buzzing with Liam's morning texts or shared playlists that once framed her world. She applied for design jobs relentlessly, hundreds of applications, but responses were scarce. The Seattle creative scene was small, and whispers of her betrayal had spread like ink in water. Even those who didn't know the full story sensed something off, her pitches too forced, her portfolio missing its old fire. Nora's nights were the hardest. She'd lie awake, replaying the retreat, the lake, Julian's fleeting charm. She didn't just regret the affair. She regretted misjudging Liam, underestimating the man who'd loved her with a steadiness she'd mistaken for ordinary. Julian had been a flare, bright, brief, and ultimately empty. She tried reaching out to him again, late one night, after too much wine, texting, "I need to understand why." His reply was a knife. "You wanted to feel something. I gave you that. Move on." She stared at her reflection in the dark screen, realizing Liam had been the one who made her feel alive, not Julian. Julian had just made her feel wanted, and the difference was a chasm. One gray afternoon, Nora wandered through a craft store, searching for supplies to spark her creativity, when she stopped cold. A local magazine sat by the checkout, its cover featuring Liam. He stood in a community center, surrounded by teens holding laptops, his smile easy and warm. The headline read, "Tech Mentor brings coding to Seattle's youth." She bought it, hands trembling, and read it in her car, each word a quiet wound. The article spoke of his work, his move to a new project in Portland, his quiet passion for giving back. No mention of her, of course, or their past, just a quote that cut deep. When you lose what you thought was everything, you find out who you're meant to be. Liam looked older, stronger, his face touched by sun and purpose. Nora pressed the magazine to her chest, the weight of his words settling in. He hadn't just moved on. He'd become someone better. She went home and wrote a letter. Not an email, but ink on paper, her handwriting shaky. It wasn't a plea for forgiveness. She knew that door was locked. It was an admission of her blindness, her arrogance, how she'd chased a thrill and lost a love that was real. She wrote about seeing him now, not just as the man she'd lived with, but as the one who'd shown her what integrity looked like. She didn't mail it. She folded it, tucked it into a drawer, and let it sit, a quiet confession to herself. Some truths were meant to be held, not sent. Meanwhile, Liam was building a new life in Portland. He'd taken a contract with a green energy startup, trading Seattle's gray for Oregon's lush trails. He hiked at dawn, joined a book club, and spent weekends teaching kids to code. He didn't talk about Nora, didn't check her socials, didn't wonder what she was doing. His life was full, not with noise but with meaning. When a friend asked if he'd ever love again, he laughed softly. "I'm already learning to love myself. That's enough for now." His days were clean, his nights untroubled. He'd walked through betrayal and emerged whole, not because he'd found someone new, but because he'd found himself. Nora, though, was still unraveling. She landed a small freelance gig, but her designs fell flat, her spark buried under guilt. She saw Liam's absence everywhere. In the coffee shop they used to haunt, the playlist that still popped up on her phone, the way her apartment lacked the warmth he'd brought to their old condo. She didn't know it yet, but the final piece of this story was coming, a moment that would force her to face not just what she'd lost, but what Liam had gained, and how his quiet strength would echo in ways she couldn't yet imagine. Spring crept into Seattle, but Nora's world remained gray. Her studio apartment, still smelling of damp and burnt toast, had become a quiet cage. She'd settled into a rhythm of solitude. Instant coffee at dawn, long walks with podcasts she barely heard, freelance gigs that paid just enough to keep the lights on. Sleep was elusive, coming only after hours of staring at the ceiling, her mind replaying the choices that had dismantled her life. She no longer blamed Liam, not even a fraction. The fault was hers, not just for betraying him, but for failing to see the rare, steady love he'd offered. She'd mistaken his quiet strength for something mundane, and now she craved the peace she'd once dismissed as boring. One chilly evening, Nora found herself walking past Liam's old condo. She didn't plan it. Her feet just carried her there. She didn't knock. She knew he'd moved to Portland months ago, but standing in front of the building felt like facing a ghost. A new tenant, a woman with a dog, stepped out, laughing into her phone. The condo wasn't Nora's anymore, hadn't been for a long time. In her pocket was the letter she'd written months earlier, its edges worn from being held too often. She drove to a small cafe downtown, one she and Liam used to visit, and slipped the letter onto a community bookshelf. No name on the envelope, just a note. "If this feels like yours, it probably is." She walked away, leaving it behind like a weight she could finally set down. Nora's life didn't transform overnight. She kept applying for jobs, but the design world remained unforgiving, her name still carrying the faint echo of scandal. She took on small projects, piecing together a living, but her creativity felt like a faucet turned to a trickle. She thought of Liam constantly, not with hope of reconciliation, but with a quiet ache for the woman she'd been with him, the one who'd believed in her own potential. Julian was a distant memory, his charm exposed as shallow, his absence a reminder that he'd never been more than a fleeting distraction. In Portland, Liam was thriving in a way that felt effortless, though it had been a hard one. He'd settled into a new routine. Mornings hiking through Forest Park, evenings coding for a startup, or mentoring teens at a local tech hub. He'd adopted a rescue dog, a scruffy mutt who trailed him on trails, and joined a writing group where he penned short essays about resilience, never mentioning Nora, but weaving her shadow into his words. When a colleague asked if he'd ever trust someone new, he smiled and said, "I trust myself now. That's the foundation." His life wasn't loud or flashy. It was full, grounded, his own. One crisp morning, Nora saw a post on social media, shared by a mutual friend. It was Liam, standing on a Portland trail, his dog at his side, the city's skyline faint in the distance. The caption was simple: "The best views come after the hardest climbs." Comments poured in, friends praising his work, his calm, his growth. Nora read them all, her chest tight. She didn't message him, didn't like the post. Instead, she closed the app and walked to her window, staring at the rain-slicked street below. She realized then that Liam's revenge wasn't in the locked door or the shipped boxes. It was in his transformation, in becoming a man she'd spend the rest of her life wishing she hadn't lost. Years later, Nora would find her footing again, slowly. She'd move to a new city, take on projects that sparked a flicker of her old fire, build a life that was hers but always carried a quiet scar. Liam, meanwhile, stood on a snowy Oregon trail, his breath clouding the air, his dog bounding ahead. He didn't think of Nora anymore, not really. His life was defined not by what he'd lost, but by what he'd chosen: growth, purpose, a peace that didn't need applause. And when asked if he'd ever love again, he'd say, "I already do. Starts with me." That was the end of it. Not a shout, not a fight, but a quiet triumph, the kind that closed the door for good and left no echo of regret.